Hello, I'm Charlotte Curtis, Head of Adult Services with the Livingston Parish Library, and I'm here with Parish President Layton Ricks. We're sitting in the beautiful main branch of your Livingston Parish Library, and during our current COVID crisis, while the libraries had to be closed, we've been reaching out to you virtually because we're always thinking about you, our patrons, and we miss you. So this is how we can make a connection with you. And today, we've got one of our most important community leaders here, and I've asked him to come in and talk with us about the impact that books and reading have had on his life. Because you know, you don't get to be in a position of authority like President Ricks without being able to assimilate a lot of information easily from a variety of sources and then to communicate that to a variety of audiences. So he's going to talk with us about the books that have had an influence on him, as well as the impact that reading's had upon himself. And this is just an informal conversation between friends. So thank you again for coming. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're incredibly busy, and I'm sure that especially during a crisis like this, there's a million other things you could be doing, and the library really appreciates you coming.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Actually, it's very nice to be talking about something other than the virus right now. So I appreciate the offer to come, and certainly my pleasure to be here.
Great. Oh, we were talking before we started filming. I'm a grandma too, and I know that I love to read to my grandchildren, and you mentioned your grandparents.
Oh, I remember when I was growing up. I mean, of course, you didn't have the iPhones, and you didn't have all the internet and all these things that we have now, but back then you read, and I can remember many, many nights sitting on their lap and then ultimately sitting beside them as I got a little bigger at a very young age with them reading. I mean, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, all these things, and if you remember, Popeye was a big cartoon back then.
Oh, yes.
Well, there are always these messages, and of course, as a child, you don't realize it, but looking back and now having grandkids, reading to them, I understand, and you can see some of the themes and some of the messages behind a lot of what you read. And there's so much information to be gathered from reading versus watching things on TV and the iPads. Those are all great tools, and I realize we've sort of moved into that era. But I love it when I see kids read. And then, of course, in my line of work now, I'm constantly reading all kinds of material that comes through. I'd like to say I retain it all, but I don't, so I get to go back and read a lot of it again to learn.
That's the good thing about books, it's always there.
It is. Well, and that's a good point, because it is always there. And of course, the beautiful library like what we have right here in Livingston is a prime example of that. And I know y'all stay very busy up till the virus of all the different tools and things that you have to offer. Books are still the primary source. They really are. And of course, my favorite has always been the Bible. Because you just gather so much information, and you learn through the years, and as God leads you, as you're reading through prayer, you pick up different messages, even with the same verses that you read. But I think one of my biggest, as I was telling you earlier, biggest loves of life has always been weightlifting and exercise. So I've always read about those kind of things, along with nutrition. Obviously, I don't follow all the advice that I've gotten and received out of books, but that's my real love of reading. Is anything to do with anatomy, physiology, or anything to do with weightlifting and exercise.
I bet when we were going through the big flood crisis, you read all kinds of stuff about mold abatement and how to recover from a disaster like that, right?
Oh yes, all the FEMA regs, all to do with how to get past the flood, how do you deal with the construction phase of it. And a lot of the things that I read come in sheets of information, not necessarily books, because it's taken out of books and brought in for us to read and to evaluate. And then, of course, discussing what you've read. One of the things that I think happens now is everybody's in such a hurry that when they read or watch things, they may not retain a lot of it because their mind is already racing, thinking about other things, because we just lead a busy life now. It's a challenge in my world to stop and focus and read on what and comprehend what you read. I've always considered myself good at comprehension, but sometimes I worry about that because of the speed at which we act and have to work today versus years and years ago. I grew up in a small town of Kentwood, so it was still very, very laid back when I was there as a child and all through my teenage years. And so you just seemingly, and again, this was a long time ago, had a lot of time on your hands. And now people are just in such a hurry that sometimes I'm afraid they don't take the time to stop and read. And it can form so many opinions. I mean, you can just learn so much from reading that you miss out on the YouTubes and the TVs and all these other things.
That's a really good point. If you were to give our patrons and your constituents some advice about reading, what would it be?
Take the time to read. I like early morning. Now, I don't have to have a lot of sleep, and everyone that knows me knows that. So I do most of my reading between 3:30 in the morning to 5:30. And of course, you have to read things all throughout the day,
Sure.
and obviously some at night. But my point is, when you can be by yourself, and you don't have to have the noise of the TV or radio or any of these other things, and just read, you'll just be amazed at how much you can pick up and learn from whatever you're reading and retain it, which is what I was talking about earlier. That because again, we're all so busy, and when the kids are in and out, and the grandkids are in and out, and the TVs are going, and maybe your spouse is in there cooking or doing something, then you've got all this going on, and it's a little bit more challenging to sit down and actually read. We all do it, but to really get into a book and to read, you need to find that quiet time, whether yours is late at night, in the middle of the day at lunch, or early morning, whenever it might be.
So make the
Mine
commitment.
is early morning. Make the commitment to read. I have to read material all day at different
Of
points
course.
every day, but I do my best early in the morning before everybody gets to the office and we get started good. That's when I like to read.
That's a really, really good suggestion. I had not thought about that. But those early morning hours are when you're going to be freest of distractions.
Absolutely, because once you get to work and the phones start and all the day in and day out activities start, I may still have to close the door sometimes to read things, obviously, as we all do. But early morning before all that starts, I can really sit there and read. Of course, I admit I do my Facebook then too, because I can read a little bit more into
You
what
have to
I'm
read to do
looking at.
Facebook.
So I guess the point is find that quiet time that works for you as an individual and really read. Get into a good book and read. I love to read. I admit sometimes I read a little bit out of this book and then I'll jump over to that book. I'm hard pressed sometimes to sit down and just go from A to Z through a book. But I've been blessed enough to be able to go back and pick up and go. Because again, I do it early morning. So
Sure.
You tend to have more time.
That's smart. So because you grew up reading thanks to your grandparents and you've read all through your life, that's given you the skills that you need to be a successful parish president, because you've got the reading comprehension skills and the ability to use your critical thinking skills to unpack all the knowledge that you get from what you read.
I think so. And then too, growing up, my mom didn't work in our early elementary years. She wanted to be home with all of us and with my grandparents and with her reading. And again, you just didn't have the distractions of all
Sure.
the electronic devices that we have today. It's just what you did. And you learned, I mean, from the Wild West days, you learned just things that then when you did see and did finally get a TV and see what Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all, and I'm dating myself,
Okay.
but all these heroes did back then, after reading about them, I mean, it just all would come together. And I think it's the same way today. Because I know in reading to the grandkids or showing them the books and looking at books with them, trains and things, especially that my youngest grandson loves.
Oh, yes.
You recall all those things. And one of my favorite books of all time with the kids and the grandkids has always been The Little Train That Couldn't, or That Could, The Little Train That Could. And just the story behind that you get to share now with my grandkids, and hopefully someday, they'll pick it up and run with it too, because we still have those books.
Well, and our parish certainly picked it up and kept on going after the flood.
Absolutely. And that's part of what you learn, is how to cope with things. I mean, you really do learn a wide spectrum of how to deal with all kinds of things in life that come your way the more you read. And I just encourage people to read. Not only read, but make up your own mind at what you're reading.
Sure.
Comprehend it. Because you get all these different opinions now through social media. And I'm not saying any of that's bad, but you get all that. But once you get into a book, it's just you and that book, just you and that author. And sometimes that can help you really understand what's going on.
I agree.
So
You heard it from the parish president. Read to your children. Model reading, because they're always watching, and it doesn't do for you just to say, oh yeah, reading's important, if they never see you pick up a book. And look for the lessons you can pick up through everything that you read. So again, Charlotte Curtis, Head of Adult Services with the Livingston Parish Library. Thank you so much, President Ricks. It's
My
been wonderful
pleasure.
sitting here and talking with you about reading.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.